Hello, hello. I think everybody's muted. There we go.
There we go. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can. Hello, Chris. How are you? I'm Cameron.
Hi, Cameron. Hi,
Hey.
Louise.
Are you
How are
there?
you?
Oh, there we go. There we go. Everybody's here.
Awesome.
No,
Now it says I'm muted again.
you're not.
I'm not. It says you unmute. Okay. All right. Well, there we go. Yeah, that would be a problem.
There you go.
Happy Canada Day to my former Canadian.
Yeah, you too.
Thank you.
I'm still Canadian.
Well, yeah, it's okay. But you probably don't celebrate Canada Day.
I do.
You do?
Yeah, of course. I got
Aw.
the Canadian flag out front and everything.
Awesome. You can see my Canadian flag behind me.
So is this a cookout and fireworks day like it is in the States on the 4th? Same kind of deal?
On the 4th, you know what? I guess so. Yeah, it is the cookout. They do fireworks and stuff like that. I don't generally partake in the fireworks.
Ah,
It's getting kind of old.
yeah, I get it.
I was in bed. Yeah.
It's like, fireworks, any reason to throw fireworks off, they find it,
Yep, very true. Very
It's
true.
not a bad thing. Something to celebrate. There's always something to celebrate.
Yeah.
I like the professional ones. Those are the ones that I like to watch.
Yeah, those are the ones I like too.
So, Chris, in about a minute, Cameron will tell us to stand by. So we will be live on over internet radio and live on Facebook. So we'll be quiet as we hear the opening and stuff. I will welcome my listeners. Read your bio. Welcome you to the show, and we'll jump right on in it. Awesome.
Exactly. Yeah.
Do you have any questions that you can ask in 30 seconds or less?
Me?
Yeah.
No.
All good? Right answer.
All good. We will roll with it, whatever happens.
I bet we will.
Right. All right. Stand by. I'm going to do Facebook Live right now, and I'm going to feed you the signal.
Inspiration, brave action, and heartwarming journeys. This is what the Louise H. Reed Show brings you. Now, here's your host, Louise H. Reed.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me again today. I'm your host, Louise H. Reed, with listeners in over 145 countries and millions of iTunes downloads and ongoing podcasts. I'm the fortunate host here every Tuesday at this time to talk life and leadership with everyday people doing extraordinary things. People who take brave, bold action in pursuit of their dreams and goals and are here to share their journey to help you do the same in yours. As always, I'm so grateful to each one of you for listening to the show. There's absolutely nothing more valuable than time, and so I'm honored that you are sharing yours with me. You've heard me say before, actions speak louder than words. We know the old cliche. So to show my gratitude, I've started a Lady Boss Loyalty monthly swag giveaway. Simply comment on a podcast episode on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, or LinkedIn with the hashtag LadyBossLoyalty, and you'll automatically be entered. Now on to today's guest, who I'm super excited to introduce to you. Before we hear from Kris, let me tell you a little bit about her. First of all, I'm really grateful that Kris, who can pronounce her last name for us in a few minutes, goes by Kris Macc, is an author, speaker, consultant, and coach. She is the founder and president of Macc Solutions, a consulting firm specializing in emotional intelligence and leadership development in the workplace. So clearly you can see we would have a connection. As a consultant, speaker, and coach, she's worked with Fortune 500 and mid-sized companies, nonprofits, and universities. She believes in the power of women supporting women. She lives in Tampa with her family. She loves traveling and practicing yoga in her spare time. And she is the author of a brand new kick-ass book called #No Approval Needed. Those watching on Facebook or later on the YouTube channel can see the book I'm holding up here. It is a spicy mix of Sex in the City, Daring Greatly, and You Are a Badass. I wish I'd had come up with that description myself, because that's completely what the book is. Welcome to the show, Kris. People have not joined me to listen to me. They've joined me to listen to you. So welcome.
Thank you for having me. I am so excited about this conversation because you and I have shared some really good laughs, and I know we will again today. So
I'm so glad. I have no doubt that will be the case too. So I do want to share. I love to share with my listeners how I come to be connected with the people who come onto the show, and I'm guessing we were connected on LinkedIn somehow. Do you remember?
Somehow, yeah. I mean, I think it's that 7 degrees of separation kind of thing, and we're friends of friends.
And I don't think it's 7 degrees anymore. I think that expression must be. I'm sure it's changed. I mean, we got
probably like 2 degrees.
I know. So true. So what I recall is obviously somehow I heard a call out. You piqued my interest in indicating that you were writing a book. The book, the subtitle of the book, which I'm not sure if you knew at the time, but Women of the World Talk About Life in Their 40s. So it would have been something like that, if not that. And immediately, as a woman in my 40s, with a passion for connectedness with others, certainly around the world, right there, piqued my attention. So we reached out and connected. And there's so much wonderfulness about you to explore. What I'd like to know is what inspired you to write this book and to do that call out in the first place?
So I think we have to go back a few years. Many people know, but many people don't, that my father unexpectedly passed away. It was something that was very sudden and tragic. And when that happened, as often life-changing events can do for us, we can, take a moment to pause and reflect on what our life looks like and what do we want to change about it. And so that was definitely a life-changing moment for me in that way. But we had a celebration of life for him, and about 300 people attended, and they were from all walks of life. And he really was somebody who made an effort to stay connected to people. And so even, he was 72 when he died, but he had people there from going back to elementary school. So when I looked around the room, and I talk about this in the book, I had very few women friends there. And my sister, on the other hand, had a lot. And it was one of those moments for me that I internalized as my own doing, and recognized that, like so many of us do as women, we try to do it all. I was a mom of twins. I had a demanding career. And so something had to give. And it wasn't that those relationships with my women friends weren't important, but they got put on the back burner. And I recognized that, I probably wasn't showing up for people the way they needed to be, needed a friend to show up for them. And I certainly wanted them there, and I wanted that to change. So I made an effort to start to reconnect with old friends and develop new women friendships through Facebook and LinkedIn and all of that, and became a leader of a women's group. And so as I started to spend more time with different groups of women, and these groups were not overlapping, but yet I was hearing very similar themes. I'm like, man, somebody needs to write these things down. Sometimes we think we're the only ones going through something, and that is not the case. And so I initially thought, oh, you know what? I'll just interview like my friends and close colleagues. And then I thought, gosh, wouldn't it be cool to find out if other women from all over the world who are in their 40s, which I think is a time of major transformation, are having a similar journey. So that's when I put the call out on Facebook and LinkedIn, and got a tremendous response, and the rest, is sort of history, as they say, or her story, as they say.
I love that. So much to even explore and unpack in that. First of all, I'm sorry to hear about your father. And, as many of us go through challenges in our life, to your point, we can choose. That's a big fork in the road, isn't it? Mm-hmm. And we have a really big choice. And so I'm thrilled to have been connected with you through tragedy. It's brought us together, and it's brought you closer with many more females in your life, no doubt. I love what you said about, wondering if others were feeling the same way. One of the things I walked away from your book, there were many things. Well, there were tears, and there was laughter. Like, there was and everything in between. Yeah. And I wrote this down because I was thinking to myself, in preparing for this interview, I thought, what did I really walk away with at the end of it all? Because there's tons. But it was that I felt a connection to other women in the book. A sense of connectedness more broadly to women all around the world who weren't even represented in the book.
Yeah.
And I thought, like, it's full of heart. Heart has to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that was the goal. It was always started off as a passion project. It has remained a passion project for me. And I was meeting with somebody yesterday who's a TV news anchor, and we were talking about, she's also an author, and we were talking about what my goal was, and I said, if I can connect with one woman at a time and help them at least in one moment to feel that they are not alone, that we're more alike than we are different, to inspire them in some way or make them feel, whether it's sad or to feel to be laughing at something, just those universal human moments, then I accomplished my goal. And so I'm really happy with the way it's been received, and people have been embracing it. And there isn't a day that goes by that somebody doesn't message me and say, I didn't want it to end. When are you going to do another one? It's like writing, it's like having a baby. So right now I'm like, I can't even think about that. But
not even over the pain of childbirth yet. Please. Well, it's funny you say that, because my book writing coach has actually said to me that writing a book is like growing and birthing a child. So interesting that you actually use that analogy. Did you find that? I see you nodding.
It is very reminiscent of that. Just so much goes into it, and your book is your baby. It's very analogous to that. You put so much blood, sweat, and tears in it, and you end up with this product at the end that comes to fruition, and you want it to be healthy and happy. It's like a baby. It really is in that way. A lot of vulnerability, big exercise in vulnerability for me. Probably the most vulnerable thing I've ever done. There's a lot, while I tell the stories of women in here, and I was so honored that they trusted me to share embarrassing moments or fearful moments or extremely sad, whatever they were, courageous, inspirational. Some of those stories are confessions. Some are things that people don't want associated with their professional brand. And they were confidential conversations. So nobody's name is mentioned in there. There are a couple personally identifying factors, but I only did that with consent for a couple people. But my stuff is not cloaked. Mm-hmm. So, that's very vulnerable. And I remember when I had sent it out to my launch team, there were about 100 people that got the book before it was released. And I started getting messages from people, and I wanted to crawl under a rock, because I'm like, oh my gosh, people are reading this. They're going to know me in a very different way. I can't take it back.
It's true.
Which is sort of like having a baby. You can't, the baby's not here. So you got to deal with whatever comes up, your way. And it was so vulnerable for me. So vulnerable.
And I think it's really interesting that you say that, because you don't know usually when you're exposing yourself and you're revealing something to someone, you have some element of control over who is hearing the message, who you are giving the message to.
Yeah.
You are putting this out there with the hopes that it gets received the right way, the way it was intended, and by the right people, but you have no idea. Right. And so talk about, open kimono and you don't know who's looking.
Yeah. And I think add in the fact that not only are there personal stories infused in it, but some of the topics were very controversial and very taboo and not very mainstream. And so, I wondered how that would be received. But at the end of the day, I always approached it from, I am someone who's fascinated by humans and human behavior. And why shouldn't we be able to talk about these things that are absolutely going on? And let's unpack them and explore them and find out what people's opinions are about them. And so that's what we did. And I think it's so interesting. The book at one time in that first month when it was considered a new release was like a number one new release in 15 different categories. People, well, how can that be? Because we talked about so many topics that I could put it in, 20 different categories. And so, I laughed because there was one that was like, it was like number one in Christian professional growth, and then sexuality at the same time. And I'm like, just the juxtaposition of those two was just, it cracked me up.
It is funny, but it also shows, it just is a really beautiful reminder of the complexity of who we are as human beings.
Yeah.
We try to put ourselves in boxes, and we do that through various types of assessments to get better understanding of self and others. And I think those can be really fantastic tools to use, and not intended to put people in boxes, but it does. We seek to do that for greater understanding. But the intersectionality of it all is what I find so fascinating, and why I loved hearing about all of these categories that you won awards in. And congratulations for being such a book that's come hot off the press and been so well received. A moment ago, you talked about that you included so many taboo topics. What's one of those topics? So listeners who perhaps haven't had their hands on a book or their eyes on a book, they know what we're talking about.
I'll give you three. So one would be, we talk about sex. So guess what, folks? Women in their 40s are having sex. This may surprise you, but it is happening. It is real. And the way we think about sex is very different from our 20s and 30s. Another topic that is taboo and controversial are affairs. And in the book, there are quite a few confessions. And I actually have some data on the ones who did self-report, whether they had cheated or been cheated on. And then I think the third topic is, we talk about our bodies and how we feel about it, and the ways that it's changing. And we poke fun a little bit about it. But it's nice to know we're not the only ones. And it's so funny. I've had so many women who have come back and privately messaged me, or even put it in a tweet or out on social media, that they're so glad to know they're not the only ones who've had a chin hair. And I just think that's hysterical. We have to like embrace this. We have to laugh about it. And I talk about it in the book. I think one of the women that I interviewed says, this is like a cruel joke from God, because at the time we start getting these whiskers on our face, our eyesight starts going, and you can't see it unless you're in natural light. And you must have a pact with a trusted friend who if they see it, it's like, see something, say something, and pluck, because
And that, I think, is just a really beautiful example. And the book is littered with these stories of the realness of it and the humor behind it.
Yeah. And that was the goal, was let's take the masks off. I wanted to make it safe in these conversations for women to feel comfortable having an honest, real conversation. We're so good at putting those masks on, but we're not being our authentic selves when we do it.
We're absolutely not. And so there's something that you wrote that interested me, many things, about who the book was written for. And I just want to share that with the listeners right now. This book is for anyone interested in living authentically without needing permission. Women in midlife, younger women wondering what to expect, older women who understand it only gets better, and for men who want a sneak peek into the psyche of women.
Yeah.
And yes, like, to all of that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I know the answer to this, but I'm curious to hear a little bit more. Like, who have you been hearing from in terms of who is getting value from this book? Have you been hearing from all of those groups?
Yeah, I have. Obviously the biggest, target group is women our age who are experiencing these same things and are able to relate so much to it. But I've heard from a lot of older women as well, because they've already gone through this. And what I've heard from them is, oh yes, and it only gets better. You're so right. the younger women are saying, oh my gosh, I don't need to be afraid of my 40s anymore.
Yeah.
And I can relate to that because I remember throwing myself a birthday party for my 39th. And it was like a big bash, and I did nothing for my 40th because I was like almost sad that I was leaving my 30s. And had I known what I know now, that this is like my favorite decade so far. I love who I am. I love the confidence that I have, my willingness to accept and embrace change and know that, yeah, there's going to be struggles, but I have the tools to deal with it. I don't need to apologize. I'm not asking for your permission or approval. That is like liberating. And then hearing from men has been really interesting because I've had so many who have come up to me and said, hey, if you do another book, will you do it on men and do something similar? And I think that's really interesting. It wasn't anything I had considered when I wrote this book. But if you think about it, oftentimes men do not have these kinds of conversations with other men. They may or may not with their life partner, but typically with other men, they're talking about sports, politics, or business. They're not having an opportunity to take the mask off and get deep. And so there's actually one review from a man who says, I am so jealous of the kinds of conversations that you women can have with each other. We don't have that ability because we are raised in a culture of shame, and men are taught, you can't be emotional, and these are not safe topics, and man up, pull your big boy pants on, all of these messages that they get from the time they're babies. And so I think it could be really healing if they were honest and opened up to me. It could be really healing, I think, for men to be able to read that, you know what, hey, I guarantee you they're not the only ones going through something. And, what the other perspectives are of men their same age from around the world.
I think it's really interesting. And I think it was really brave of that person to share that with you. And I know that my partner, Jay, has said the same thing.
Yeah.
Has said the same thing, that I know he would love to have more conversations like women are able to have. So I look forward to that book. Wink, wink.
Yeah, when.
That's okay. So I want to jump into what you were saying, that there were many, but 3 of the taboo topics that you brought up in the book. One of them was around sex. What did you learn about what changes for women? You obviously have your own experience, but in terms of what you heard from the women that you interviewed, what did you learn about what changes?
It was really interesting. I think there was a lot of the 20s were thought of as a time of, whomever, wherever, whenever. And I did not have that same experience. I wish I would have. I didn't. I was raised Catholic, and I talk about that in the book too, because there were a few people that had that same Catholic upbringing, and that carries its own culture of shame with it. Sex, you're either a good girl or you're not. Sex is for, it is, they talk about love and all that, but they talk about procreation and being a good girl, being a good girl, being a good girl. And so when I heard that, I was like, damn, maybe I missed out here. The 30s really represented a time of family planning and raising little ones for most of us. And then also, focusing on career. So sex was not as much of a priority once we got pregnant. Then it was like, I'm too tired. I have all these other things. Like, I'm not interested in that. And now the 40s is sort of a mixed bag. So I went in with some preconceived notions because of some of the women that, I spend a lot of time with and listening to their stories and all of that. So, but what I found, I thought it was going to be that, people's libido was going to be off the charts. And that was really a misconception. It was a mixed bag. I would say some people said their libidos were lower, and primarily for those people, it was a result of disconnection with their partner, or they had a major health diagnosis that was affecting, whether they wanted to have sex or not. Some people, the libido was the same as it always been, and some it had increased and was really high, and they were having the best sex of their life. And so, it was just a really interesting, it was a really interesting conversation. And I think too, we do talk about shame in the context of sex, and for some women, it's releasing the shackles of shame and finally embracing yourself as a sexual being and your sensuality and owning that, and that there should be no apology for that. We are sexual beings, and that's how we're wired. And so, it's okay for women to do that. And so I just loved that it gave people the opportunity to talk about something that, obviously everyone's doing and nobody talks about necessarily.
And I love how in the book you do break it up that way into, the 20s, 30s and 40s. And so obviously that became pretty apparent, as you just articulated for us right now, that there were some trends. Mm-hmm. And one of the other things that I found really neat about your book are the questions for reflection. So many of us who love to read, me being one, I just devour books. Yeah. And unless there are questions that are being asked, I sometimes am guilty of just consuming it to consume it. In the moment, I'm really enjoying it, and I think I'm absorbing. But am I really? Not so sure. So I love how even just asking some simple questions. So I'm just going to share the questions that you have at the end of this section, because we're talking about sex right now. Questions for reflection you have for the reader. How big of a role does sex play in a relationship? How has your view of sex changed over the years? Has your sex drive changed? If so, how? I don't think we stop and ask ourselves simple questions like this, yet really powerful.
We don't give ourselves the gift of self-reflection enough. And it's so funny because the very first chapter, which is about, I asked the question, are we, what do you think about being in your prime and all that kind of stuff? And so the end of that chapter are questions about like what feeds your soul and have you hit your prime? How do you know? All that kind of stuff. And so a friend of my husband's got the book and she was like devouring it, and she texted him all those questions and she goes, I don't know. But now I know I need to be thinking about these things. Why don't I know? Why haven't I thought about these things? And I thought it was such a great response, and I loved it.
But so true. The gift of time. I mean, I said, that's why at the beginning of every radio show, I thank people for their time and for spending it with me, because I'm with my guests, obviously, but you're the ones bringing all of the juice and the gold to the conversation, because we don't give ourselves that gift of time, do we? In so many ways. And then
I do have to give a quick shout out to Kristen Sherry, who I believe you know Kristen also, right? So she was on my beta reader team, and she's just brilliant. And that was her idea. She's like, you already have these questions in the body, but pull it out in a separate section. And it made the book 10,000 times better. So
shout out to Kristen. And let's do a shout out for her book at the same time.
Yes, UMAP. She's on fire.
Yes. And great. And I love how you're bringing that up. We don't get anywhere alone. No. And I one of the things that I've noticed as women a lot rising in leadership and rising in the feminine leadership, when women rise, many rise.
Yes.
So we don't get anywhere alone. Who else has helped you along this journey? Whether it's this book, because we're really focusing on your book right now, or just even through your journey through life, that you just think of really monumental people to.
Yeah, so I would give another shout out to Kellen Barfield, who also, I met through LinkedIn and has become a very close friend. And not only did she help me with the book and help me improve it and make it better, but just, helps me in life. Like, I think we both serve to be those honest mirrors for each other. When you need somebody who, you just don't want a champion, but you want somebody who is going to give you good, constructive feedback and ask the right questions to help you, get out of your own way. So I would definitely give a shout out to her. My best friend, Becky Bray, has been there since we were kids. And she is a big part of this book too. My sister, mother, I have a lot of really strong women, my grandmother, aunt, really strong women that have, I can look to that have been there, and tons of colleagues and wonderful LinkedIn friends that have really become true friends, not just, that we're messaging each other or responding to posts, but we we take the conversation offline. And so I'm just blessed. Yeah.
What advice would you have for a listener who perhaps doesn't have those mentors, who perhaps are in that place that you mentioned you found yourself a number of years ago, when you looked up and around and thought, I don't have those people in my life who I want? You shared a little bit about what you did. What advice would you have for them?
The first step is acknowledging that you want something to change. If everything's, you're okay with status quo and the acceptable level of mediocrity, then nothing's going to change. So you got to recognize that you want change, and then you got to create a plan, and it requires you stepping out of your comfort zone. We can't just wait for people to come to us. We have to express an interest, and we can't take things personally when somebody declines. Like, that's okay. I have people who aren't coming to my launch party. I understand. It's no big deal. I'm not going to internalize that and think like they don't want to be a part of it. I'm just, they have other priorities. It's okay. So it's putting yourself out there. So whether that's, becoming active on a platform like Facebook or LinkedIn for a start, or joining a women's group, attending women's events, doing whatever you can that's going to put you in proximity to be able to develop a relationship with somebody. But you do have to own that and step into that power. You can't wait for people to just know what you're thinking or wanting. You have to be intentional about creating it.
Oh, that's great advice. What did you learn about yourself through writing this book?
It's funny because one of the biggest things that I learned, and I think people go, huh? Like, really? What? How can that be? How did you not know that? But I underestimated the importance of kindness. And it's because I have a very kind husband. And so I just take that for granted. And in interviewing all of these women and hearing their different stories and experiences, not everyone has that in a relationship or had it. So a lot of the women, if they didn't have it, finally said, enough is enough, I'm out of here. But it took, obviously, a lot of internal turmoil to be able to make that decision. And so that was one of the biggest takeaways, was like, man, that's so important to me, and I take it for granted. So that was a big one. I think, too, just knowing that I can inspire others just like others inspire me. We don't give ourselves that kind of credit. We don't always know, but I am inspirational to others, and I need to own that and be okay with it and not minimize it.
Which we do a lot, which women do a lot of, that's for sure.
Yeah.
I remember even the first time I heard about that concept, I was saying, oh no, I don't do that. Yeah. Someone commented on a top I was wearing or something. So we're talking about really, really safe sort of thing.
Right.
I said, oh, this only cost me $10.
Yep.
We do it. What? I didn't say anything about that. I was actually complimenting you on something. And even that, minimize.
Yes. I do that too. And, we have to recognize that we're doing it and stop. Why are we doing it? Why do we feel the need to do that? Stop it.
I remember it was years ago now. I went to see a psychologist who I've mentioned a few times on this show. He was not involved in my life for very many hours, actually, yet he's been instrumental in how my life has turned out. And he told me that he just heard fear, shame, and guilt riddle through my story. And I said, nope, I believe that's other people. It's not me. He then quoted me for things he had heard me say the 2 hours leading up to that. And I said, oh my gosh, you're right. And I said, how do I stop? And he said, it's as simple and as difficult as stopping.
Yeah. Yep. Gosh, isn't that profound?
I was like, what? I've just traveled 2 hours and spoken for 2 hours to hear you say that. And yet it really is.
It really is. So you can take that and you can allow your ego to get in the way, dismiss, deny, reject, avoid, or you can start getting really curious. And that's the start of growth and transformation. It has to start with curiosity. Like, what could possibly be right about that? What's maybe different? You got to start somewhere. If we're just like, that's not right, that's not me, he's wrong, there's no growth or transformation that's going to happen there.
No.
Yeah.
So I'm very thankful that despite the fact I said that, he continued on and challenged me, and then I opened up. So I share that because it's funny, because it's simple, but also just I think the transformation never ends either. Right? There's always more that's revealed.
I hope so, because I think that's, I feel like, and I think I talk about this in the book too, that while I love my 40s, I do. I love everything about it, including the tragedies and the hard times, right? But I hope that the 50s and the 60s and the 70s and beyond continue to be times of transformation and joy and continuing to learn what feeds my soul, and honoring that, where you are choosing to be the leading character in your life, not just a passive observer. Stop allowing life to just happen. And we all have that power. It's within. It's the power of one, but we have to own it. And sometimes that's a scary thing.
Why is it so scary for people, do you think?
It's a lot easier to stay in your comfort zone, even if it's toxic or mediocre, because we know that. There's no fear there. There's no uncertainty. We know what that entails. We've been doing it. We can continue doing it even if it's killing us. But we don't know what lies outside that comfort zone. And the fear of the unknown can really, outweigh, if we allow it, our desire to move from our current situation.
It's so true. And I think that's why it often takes the straw that breaks the camel's back for someone to either leave a relationship or leave a job. Certainly that was the case for me, in leaving my relationship. And yet now that I'm on the other side, I don't look back for reasons of beating myself up. I look back with curiosity, and I just wonder actually what was my thinking that allowed me to stay? Because I don't want that thinking ever again.
Right.
I don't want that thinking ever again.
Well, I think we have these unwritten rules that guide our behavior and our decisions. And sometimes we're not even aware what they are, because maybe when we were younger, we created this rule because it kept us safe and it made sense at the time. But as we get older, it's something that possibly gets in our way, but we don't even think to question it. And we have to start, again, getting curious. What are those unwritten rules that are dictating my life, and why am I giving them so much power? They're nonsensical at this point.
I think that's a really great question for listeners to take note of and to consider. This one might be hard because there are many funny stories in your book. Is there one in particular that stands out as oh my gosh, this story was the funniest of them all?
There is. And this was told by a woman who really was a great storyteller and really painted such a vivid picture and trusted me to allow me to listen to a very embarrassing moment in her life. And she was able to find humor in the story. And we laughed and snorted, and I almost peed in my pants. And so the story was about this woman who, I believe she had her tubes tied. And she, as often can happen, when we take pain medicine and have surgery, etc., it affects our digestive system. So there was some constipation as a result. And this woman goes into great detail to tell me about how she is not a patient person. That is not one of her virtues. And so she decides that, the medicine that she's been taking isn't working, and she's going to go get X-Lax. And she does, but one dose doesn't work, so she tries like a triple dose, and then she's going to go shopping to pass the time. and finds herself in a very difficult situation because unexpectedly things started happening. And she describes doing this side shuffle, trying to make it to the bathroom to clean up the situation. And I could just see every moment of this and the panic and the embarrassment. And then she talks about how she cleaned that bathroom better than it had ever been cleaned before, and how she went out afterwards. And luckily she was shopping for clothes and she had clothes that she could change into, and handed the clerk the tags. And with no apology, it was like, here are those tags. I'm out of here.
I walked right on into that one, didn't I? How can I not own my own story?
I was going to give you the option, But honestly, that was the most hysterical. I was just dying. I was dying.
It's like I'd been waiting for the right person to tell that to.
Well, now you're telling the world.
And now I'm telling the world. So there you go. A little bit more we talk about Louise being vulnerable here. I'm glad. And that was funny. Yeah, not the situation, but you and I sharing that was hysterical. And so I imagine, both hysterical as well as tugging at your heart, this process, this journey of uncovering these stories from women, because you do explore so much. What was that like for you and your soul through that whole journey?
It's such a good example for me to continue to find ways to be vulnerable and put myself outside of my comfort zone, and being able to live vicariously through some of these stories, thinking like, well, what would I do? How would I handle that situation? And what would I do in the future if something like that presented itself? And I mean, one of the stories.
Don't take triple X-lax.
That was definitely a lesson learned for sure. And don't go shopping.
Go shopping, seriously.
You were asking for that one. But there's so many powerful stories, but one of the ones that every time someone asks me that just, always floats to the top for me as this really powerful moment of one human helping another, one woman embracing another, is a story about a woman who's on a first date, and she is in a white dress, and they're at a fancy museum kind of situation. And she, as often can happen with women our age, our periods aren't always totally regular. And so she gets her period and she doesn't know it, and she's bleeding through her dress. And another woman who does not know her discreetly pulls her aside and whispers in her ear. And this woman was undergoing cancer treatment, and she had a scarf on her head, and she took it off and wrapped it around the waist of this other woman. And every time I talk about it, I get chills. I get a little bit teary-eyed because I think it's such a powerful human story. It's so beautiful. And I have to ask myself, would I do the same for someone? I hope that answer is yes, but until we're in that situation, you can say all day long it's yes. You don't know, right? But I hope that my heart would lead me down that path, because it's so powerful and beautiful, and I love. It was one of my favorite stories, and there's so many, but that one I love to share.
That truly is a powerful one. I too have all the feels with that. And what I also think that is that after reading a story like that, certainly after you heard the story yourself from that woman, once you read that, when you find yourself in other situations, perhaps like that, I think you'll be moved to behave differently.
Yeah. It's such a good example of being so selfless, helping each other, right? I mean, just women embracing each other from just at a very human, fundamental level, one human to another. And gosh, if we had more of that in the world, just imagine the positivity and the love, right? I mean, that's how the world changes. It's simple acts of kindness.
It is. My mom growing up told me that, and I've said this numerous times as well on the show, is that kindness is the most underrated quality.
Yep.
And as a kid growing up, I was just like, okay. didn't really mean a lot. But, you know, as I've gone through life and I've gone through experiences and had kindness extended towards me, and also have been in situations where kindness wasn't, those words continue to echo in my mind and my heart. And when you look for kindness, you can see it. And when you look for opportunities to be kind, it's everywhere.
Yes, absolutely. And that, you know, what you just said was one of my key takeaways for myself, was that I underestimated the value. I just took it for granted. And it's such a powerful thing. And, you know, we always remember, those are the people that we really remember, the people that it's a simple acts of kindness. You know, they don't owe you anything. They were just doing it out of the goodness of their heart. And that's very powerful.
I think that we live in a society where when someone does something kind to us or good to us or helps us, we think that we have to pay them back in some way. And I have learned, I don't know if you have, you know, especially when my twins were born, there's one person in particular who I can never pay back to her what she did to me. There was no way.
Yeah.
And so I seek every day to pay it forward to others.
Yeah.
I was on the train the other weekend, and this isn't really the super kind, but it is an example just how it can show up. The guy in front of me was dying for a bag of chips, who was sitting in front of me, and he did not realize that the train didn't take cash. And so he said to the person who was selling the chips, you know, I don't have a credit card, so it's okay. I won't get the chips. I said, I'll buy the chips for you. I'm buying a coffee. I'm happy to buy the chips for you. If you want something else, feel free to get something else. And the shock on his face was like I just gave him $1,000 or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's just opening yourself up in these small moments to connect with other people. It really does transform. It really does transform. Yeah, it really is. And it's just those human interactions that often we aren't having. And that was one of the other reasons why I wanted to write the book, because we have all this technology, and yet so many of us feel oftentimes more disconnected than ever. And so when we are able to have those little moments of just humanness, it resonates with us very deeply in our hearts. And a while back, and this has probably been a year now, I was at Panera and I was getting my coffee, and this older woman, I will never forget her. She came up to me, and I was putting, of course, I go for like the full heavy cream in my coffee. I'm not doing the 2% or whatever. She looks at me, she goes, "You're going to get a fat ass." She was like little Italian, said it with the biggest smile ever. And I thought that was the best. I mean, it was just like, this is hysterical. And I said, I hope so. I want one, you know. She brought me joy that day. Just that like she had this little twinkle in her eye, and she knew, I think she could sense that it was going to be received well. And I was like, man, that is awesome. And I think she was like 95 or something. I ended up talking to her son, and I just was like, this just made my day. It really did. and so I love that story, and I love that. Carrying on this humorous theme, there are a few things that I wanted to share that were written in the book that I laughed at. Expect gravity because your boobs will drop. Yep, for sure. Expect that wearing high heels will catch up with you in your 40s. You might need to buy some sensible shoes. Yes. You need to stretch before running, or you'll likely pull a hamstring. You know, and those are the ones that I could just pull out off the top of my head, you know, as I'm scanning through the book again, which I will periodically pull this out and just open the book and read a chapter. And I like it for that reason too. It just, you can read this on different days and get different things from it. Right. And the chapters aren't really related. They're all different topics. So you don't have to go, you know, you don't have to build off of it. You could pick up any chapter at any point and get what you need out of it. And it's funny though. So back to the whole body thing, you know, there's a couple things that happened to me in my 40s. I mean, like, I swear it feels like the day I turned 40, I could not see in the dark anymore. So my family laughs at me because I'll walk around with a flashlight on my phone
at night as I'm walking through the house. Otherwise, I'm bumping into walls. And then another one is that, I always will joke with Kellen about this and it's actually in a movie. And I didn't realize this was a 40s thing until I saw, I think it's actually the movie called This Is 40. And they talk about when you have a full bladder, that your bladder, the stream comes out like a sprinkler head, not like a steady stream. And so I'm like, if you're in a public place and you're not sitting, you're hovering, that's a problem. So be really careful and strategic about what you're doing. So
it's like, this is a guidebook.
Yes.
This is a guidebook for women in their 40s.
Yes, exactly. And, and to just embrace it. And so, we can laugh about it. You're not the only one. It's okay. But there's so many other great things about this decade that almost no one wanted to go back.
And I find that's the interesting thing too, because we can see the things, we being society, everyone, and ourselves, we can see the things that age, a time perhaps is doing to us, right, to our bodies. What you don't see is that internal transformation, which does bring about so much groundedness and joy and confidence.
Yeah.
And you can't see that.
Yep. And
I love how you reveal that in the book.
Thank you. It's somebody describes it as we're turning into these butterflies, and it really is. It's this major metamorphosis of internally stepping into that power that we haven't done probably ever. And I think that's why it can be confusing to the men in our lives, because, especially if they knew us in our 20s, all of a sudden it's like, who is this person? This is not the person that, I grew up with or married or what have you. And so it becomes really important that we're communicating that we are going through a lot of change and transformation, and we do value you, but you've got to be there and not hold us back. Allow us to blossom and feel free to ask questions, but we can smell the BS from a mile away. We have strong opinions at this point. We know what we like. We know what we don't like. I read a funny story on Facebook. There was a woman who said she wanted to get a playhouse for her grandkids, and she was telling her husband, and he's like, no, the grandkids already have too many toys. And she tells him, oh, honey, I wasn't asking for your permission. I was making conversation. And I just love the essence of that. I was like, yes, that's exactly what it is.
It is so true. And you do make a really interesting point about, well, one thing I want to say, I actually got a tattoo of a butterfly when I was 42 for that very reason, because I felt like I was fine. I was flying. So you talk a little bit about this in the book in terms of advice for men who are trying to understand women in their 40s. What did you learn through those pieces and that you got from women that you interviewed? It
was really interesting. I was coming at it from the perspective of men in general. And I think most of the women answered it from the perspective of, I'm talking to my spouse, my life partner. So there was a lot of, we are no longer little girls. Stop treating us this way. We have earned your respect. We are your partner. Don't expect that we're going to baby you. We're done. You're not the first priority anymore. Guess what? We're going to start putting ourselves first at times, because we've spent our lives taking care of others. And now we recognize the importance of self-care and self-love. And so while that may come as a rude awakening, get ready for it, because we're going for a girls' day, or we're going to the spa, we're going to claim that space to work out or read a book or whatever it is that feeds us joy. We want you there by our side. We love you. We value you, but we need to be our own person, and don't try to BS us, because it's not going to work. And so there was a lot of that. And then, there was the fact of some people saying hey, recognize that the deck of cards has been stacked in your favor. We're not blaming you, but let's acknowledge it. There's still gender disparity that exists in many realms all over the world. And, when you just deny it or dismiss it, we lose respect for you. But having said that, we know we can't make a difference in that alone. We have to partner with you if we're going to change that. We want you by our side. We want your help. And so, yeah, I mean, there was just so much. And it's funny, I've had a number of people who've said, I read this chapter to my husband because I wanted him to understand, and I wanted to have a dialogue. And I think that can be really helpful. And I think, you know, even the chapter on sex or affairs or our bodies, what's going on with our bodies, I think that can be really helpful to have a dialogue with our partners, because sometimes they don't know, and we can't assume that they know.
Sometimes.
All the time.
I think those messages that you just shared about what women shared with you about the men in their life, I think that's really, really powerful, because at times I do kind of feel bad for them. Mm-hmm. I do, because of this change and shifts and the transformation that are occurring to the women in their lives who they love but don't know how to support. And so having a guidebook like this could just bring, I think, so much value. We have 3 minutes left, and I want to give you the chance to share, how could people find out more? How could they get in touch with you and get their hands on a copy of this book, Kris?
So I have a Facebook group called #NoApprovalNeededBook, and that's a public group, and I post inspirational stories and quotes and research and articles from people. It's a great, you know, very eclectic place to find information about a whole host of topics. KrisMac-author.com is the website. They can find the book on Amazon. It's in paperback and the Kindle version right now, or it can be ordered from any bookstore worldwide.
Fantastic. Kris, thank you so very much for everything that you have shared with us today, for writing the book. It was a blast, as I expected. And thank you for your time and just being so giving and sharing of it all.
My pleasure.
And thank you, of course, to you, as always, my guests, my listeners, and my loyal followers. I'd like to remind you, as I always do, that information about my guest today, Kris, and my radio show can be found on my website, louisehreed.com. Also, a big shout out and lots of love to my producer, Cameron Steele at Contact Talk Radio, and my main squeeze in my life, Jay Andrews. And finally, I'm here to highlight and showcase people like Kris, who are taking brave, bold action and whose actions have a positive impact in our world. With that said, I'd like to encourage you all to be brave, be bold, and be happy. Until next Tuesday at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, I'm Louise H. Reed, wishing all of you a beautiful, amazing day. Thanks, my friends. Bye-bye.